Joining me right now, a colleague, Senator John Cornyn from the great Republic of Texas, for on this and obviously so much more with the State of the Union last night. Senator, pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Dana.
So I got to get your reaction, sir, to what we just saw on the floor of the Senate there with Senator Mitt Romney. How do you react to that? He's voting to convict.
Well, we all take an individual oath, and I think ultimately have to do what we individually believe is the right thing. I happen to disagree with him, but he's within his rights to cast his vote as he sees fit. But the fact remains, Dana, that we're not going to get to the 67 vote threshold. This partisan impeachment was always destined to end with the acquittal of the president. And I think even Nancy Pelosi knew that, but was stampeded into it. And now you can see some of her frustration, like when she pulled that petty tearing up of the president's speech last night. She's clearly not a happy camper, but I think this is largely of her own making.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I want to get your reaction to some of the other. There were some really good moments in the State of the Union address, and you're right that in the Senate they're going to fall short of votes that they would need to do this, to impeach the president. You've said too. I think the phrase you used was that it is half baked, the investigation and the impeachment case. You were expected, being in the Senate, to apparently do the job that the House and Adam Schiff didn't do. Is that a first?
Well, it is, and it's not something we should encourage. I think one of my colleagues said today, one of the messages to come out of this is, don't do this, House of Representatives. Don't send us partisan impeachments. That's something, again, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Jerry Nadler, others said during the Clinton impeachment back in 1999, but that's a lesson that they apparently did not remember. But I think that's one reason why we haven't done this. This is only the third trial in 232 years since our Constitution was ratified, is because this is the most extreme option you can choose in a constitutional republic like ours. The main way we choose our leaders should be and should always remain through elections, because that is the most consistent with our fundamental values of consent of the governed being what gives legitimacy to all government action. The act of a partisan group in the House and a compliant Senate is not a way that we should be choosing our leaders, except in the most extreme circumstances.
Yeah, it looks like they're losing a lot of American support, voter support for this effort as well, particularly after a lot of polling data comes in showing where voters stand on the economy. There have been some members of the Senate that have floated the idea of they're trying to triangulate. They want to have it both ways. They want to appease voters because they realize there was nothing here, but at the same time they feel as though they have to give them something. So some have discussed the option of maybe censuring him. What is your response to that if that actually comes up as an actionable item?
Well, what I've actually learned since I've held elected office is you can't have it both ways. And so I think this is an ill-fated effort. We've gone way too far down the impeachment route to go back to this idea of censure. So my prediction is this will go nowhere. I know Joe Manchin, my colleague from West Virginia, is floating it. I assume because he will vote to acquit. President Trump is pretty popular in West Virginia. And so that looks like his effort to have it both ways, but I predict it won't be successful.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be. I don't think that would be successful either. You bring up Joe Manchin, who is a fascinating political character to me because he is one of those Democrats that has discovered not only how to survive in a Trump era, but also thrive. And I wonder if the Democrat Party is going to be able to ever actually widen their tent enough to have those types of Democrats again. Just a little bit earlier, we were playing audio of Joe Biden in New Hampshire saying that if the Democrat Party ends up having someone like Senator Bernie Sanders, that is a socialist party. What do you make of how far left that party has slipped, and would you identify them as being a socialist party if they do in fact have a socialist nominee?
Oh, absolutely. Well, AOC and the Squad and others proudly embrace this moniker of Democratic Socialist, which is, of course, an oxymoron. Mm-hmm. You can't be a true Democrat and a socialist at the same time, which is a totalitarian government. And so, people like Joe Manchin survive and really are one of the remaining few moderate Democrats because of, frankly, his personality. Everybody likes Joe. He's a great person, but he's doing his best to navigate the radical politics of the Democratic Party, and so there's less and less room for people like him. I think the area where you see it the most is on the life issue, where basically many of the more radical Democrats have said pro-life Democrats are not welcome in their party anymore. And I think so much of what they're doing is being done to themselves, and it's not attracting the support of the American people because it's just basically pretty offensive. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of offensive, last night's State of the Union address I thought was really well done. I kind of joked a bit that it seemed as though if you had Michael Bay, who did all the Transformers movies and everything else, and Hallmark write a State of the Union address, it would be this one. It was really well done and really highlighted the record low unemployment, the immense, I think it was 63% is the Gallup poll, which, as you know, Senator, is not a left-leaning polling firm or entity. 63% of Americans are happy right now with the state of things. They like the economy, and we know that the economy, especially in a re-election period, is super important. All of these amazing things, the celebration of servicemen and women, service families, and then at the very end, you had the House Speaker tear up the copy of the president's address. What did you think when you saw that? What was your first thought?
Well, I thought it was a pretty pathetic gesture and really totally unnecessary. But she is very frustrated, as I said. I think it was largely because what she predicted last March in 2019 has proven to be true, that the president will not be convicted and removed from office. She knew that then, but she had to give in to the stampede of the radical members of her party. But I agree with you, Dana, about the speech last night. It was Reagan-esque. I remember Ronald Reagan would point to guests in the balcony in the gallery up there, but this was Ronald Reagan on steroids with all the incredible stories, a lot of them very heartrending and heartwarming stories, and I thought the president did a magnificent job.
I particularly also enjoyed his careful phrasing and the way that he articulated foreign policy and the face going forward, because it's been difficult with all the different factions on the right, just as a whole, Republicans, conservatives, independents, small L libertarians. And this is always foreign policy and Iran and Iraq. These are always kind of been little points of contention that normally would cost someone common ground. But when you look at, again, new polling data, voters really approve of the way he handled it, doing precision strike, taking out one terrorist, and then also putting a face on the cost of what military engagement looks like. This seems to be a new way of messaging about not just foreign policy, but military action going forward for Republicans. Your thoughts?
No, I agree with that. Sometimes I find myself we all want our troops to come home. Let me start with that. But unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, America is the solitary leader in the world when it comes to security measures. And if we leave a vacuum, we've seen what could happen in places like Afghanistan, where a vacuum created a safe haven for al-Qaeda, which resulted in the death on 9/11 of 3,000 Americans. So I just think we need to be thoughtful about this, but it isn't unrealistic for the president to ask NATO, for example, to engage in burden sharing when it comes to the costs of providing for mutual security. And I think people appreciate the fact that the president is asking some of these questions. And frankly, when I've had the chance to meet with small groups of senators to try to perhaps nudge him in a slightly different direction, and he listens respectfully and ultimately reserves the right to make his own decisions. But yes, I think we're asking questions and aren't making a lot of the same basic assumptions that the national security establishment would necessarily embrace initially.
Yeah. One last quick question for you, Senator, and I just want to revisit basically the audio that we came in with to start our discussion with you. You mentioned, working with different groups of senators, and it seems as though that the party has really developed a good working relationship, obviously, with the president. But I'm curious as to whether or not you feel that there should be any penalty within the party, within consideration on committee appointments, committee memberships for Senator Romney, for his decision to vote the way that he is voting as it relates to impeachment today.
Each of us represents different states, and those are the people who get to vote on us, vote for us or against us. I work for 28 million people in Texas, and those are really the final arbiters of whether or not I could to continue to serve in this position. I would hold the same view for the voters of Utah, and I don't begrudge a sincerely held belief by any senator, because sometimes I have sincerely held beliefs that may put me out of step with the rank and file or the rest of the Republican conference. So I'm just very glad that we are not going to convict and remove President Trump. I think this is proving to be a net political benefit for Republicans and for the president. And I think the most important thing in the near term is for us to be successful in reelecting President Trump and making sure that Chuck Schumer is not the majority leader in the Senate, and that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren aren't the next president of the United States.
Yes, amen to that. Yes, make sure that we retain that Senate majority. Senator John Cornyn, always appreciate the time with you. Thanks so much for joining us on this very, very, very busy day, and we look forward to talking with you again, sir. Thank you.